Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This video is a promotion, to advertise, market, and promote my website, my content, who I am as an individual, and what do I do. I'm shooting this video from my iPhone in Lake Merritt in nature because I want this to be organic. I want you to have a sense. I want you to be physiologically, psychologically, and emotionally situated within a sense of who I am as an individual organically. So this is uncut, unscripted, impromptu, spontaneously, and all organic. So my name is Atelston Fitzgerald, Holder the First. My mom named me after the first king of England who ruled between 929 and 939. I believe it's 80 or BC. I use both ever interchangeably. Nevertheless, the first king of England name was Atelston. We have the same name. Now, we know that most of blacks in South America were dispersed from the transatlantic slave trade between the 15 and 1900s from Africa. But which black person will name their child after, first to begin, the first king of England, Atelston, was a British imperialist, right? He was a Viking and an Anglo-Saxon, right? She named me after him. Obviously, she was infatuated with the aesthetic attributes, the phonological features, Atelston. Ironically, she was an unconscious instrument in a much grander orchestra, channeling, something that was, I would assume that I am destined to be in this current state. So my name is Atelston Fitzgerald, Holder the First. My mom named me after the first king of England. I'm a research scientist. I went to school. I studied a number of different areas. I'm also partially an autodidact. I was also educated by a number of different prominent and affluent individuals privately, and I was also held under the umbrella of a number of different spiritual leaders exclusively, where I have obtained a number of different obscure, esoteric, arcane, and ancient knowledge preceding eons of times, etc., etc., back to antiquity. Basically all knowledge outside the realm of scientific inquiry, all areas that science dismiss. This phone is ringing. I will continue the video. So basically, I apologize, this has to be organic, natural. Basically, my website is based on a cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary analysis. Primarily to centered around material science. I may take a radical approach to physical reality. Now, cross-disciplinary, I'll explain each term. These are just big, jargonic, verbosity term for simplistic phenomena. Cross-disciplinary is when you take an explanatory position of one discipline within the context of another. And it's a difficult field in cross-disciplinary because it requires a parity of equal knowledge in both fields simultaneously to have a cross-disciplinary, in-depth articulation of it. So I may explain physics, I may explain apology, I may explain music using physics. Cross-disciplinary entails, what is sound? Sound is a collision of air molecules. It has amplitude, frequency, velocity, acceleration, intensity. Intensity, for example, is the distance in which sound travels. Why sound is a collision of air molecules? How sound disperses? Why do we hear octaves? Why does an A chord consist of 440 hertz? And why when you double it, we hear an octave? What aspect of human biology and our internal membrane allows us to perceive sound logarithmically in subset increments? So cross-disciplinary, is an analysis of one discipline within the context of another. But it requires an in-depth knowledge of that, the simultaneously of the second discipline, and that is music. I can write, I can compose, I can transpose, I can transcribe, I can write tabs, notation, I can read and write sheet music, and I have a fundamental understanding of how music works. From the chromatic scales, the diatonic scales, pentatonic scales, major, minor, diminished, or augmented, triads, intervals. I have a sense of how chords are constructed, how the intervals are set apart, major, first to third to fifth, minor, diminished, augmented. I also got into an area This is within the context of cross-disciplinary is psychophysics, the relationship between physical stimulation and mental phenomena. And I sort of sporadically encountered this discipline when I tried to decipher why a musician and a non-musician would have the same emotional attributes when they hear, let's say, a sus4 or a sus2. This is no longer a cross-disciplinary. This is discussing music independently, how to build chords, how to play polyrhythm, syncopation, how to play fingerstyle. So I have a fundamental understanding of both fields simultaneously. That's cross-disciplinary. Multidisciplinary is when you have to take multiple disciplines into consideration. One area I might get into area of psychopathology, mental disorder, pathology, mental diseases. And I might get into key in on areas like, let's say, bipolar, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or let's say bipolar 1, manic, or bipolar 2, hypermania. Now there's a number of different parapsychological phenomena that is induced, and bipolar is prevalent for that. When manic is induced. So I have to take psychopathology, parapsychology, because you have to take stuff like precognition, premonition, clairvoyance, lucid dream. A number of different parapsychological phenomena are augmented, modified, and altered. And then you have to take areas of philosophy into consideration. During mania, a manic episode may take on a number of different philosophical ideology, like solipsism or animism, implement a spirit and a soul into tangible or intangible, organic or inorganic, animate and inanimate. Or they might take a panentheism, or a panpsychism, or hylozoism, while attributing all of physical reality to possessing some level of consciousness. So multidisciplinary, you have to take psychopathology, parapsychology, pathology, philosophy, and you have to take cognitive neuroscience into consideration, because their brain oscillation transitions from what society is ubiquitously known for in the beta or alpha when you're in a relaxed state to sometime gamma. So there's a transition. And then it affects your sleep moderator. It affects the endocrine system. So when you get into a number of different psychopathological disorders, right, you have to take a multidisciplinary approach, because many areas have to be taken into consideration, primarily metaphysics and phenomenology, the structure of consciousness and the human experience, how some psychopathological illnesses, right, how sensory perception or sensory modality, auditory, optical, olfactory, tactile, and gustatory. And I'll say kinesiology, not because it's a sensory modality, but it acts as that sometimes in neuro-linguistic programming. That's a different subject. So you see, multidisciplinary, you have to take many different areas into consideration. You know, a fascinating phenomenon outside the realm of scientific inquiry is the whole mind branch of philosophy that deals with mind and matter, substance and attributes. So multidisciplinary, you have to take psychopathology, pathology, parapsychology, philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, metaphysics, phenomenology, and a few other different areas. So 2 areas we've established so far. My website is based on cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary. Transdisciplinary now is where 2 mutually exclusive domains sort of converge, or just like a symbiosis, or just a consolidation. And that primarily is, let's look at, when you look at the top 5 search engine, right? Search engine algorithm is contingent on linguistic models, right? It uses linguistic models. Every facet of the subfield or subset of linguistics: phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And the search engine is effective when in the query when it comes to intangible, like let's say love, emotions. These are intangible construct. And then you have physical construct, that is like a cup or a watch. But one of the inefficiency of this particular area I work in, transdisciplinary, is primarily computer programming, right? Programming language, and how ineffective it is when it comes to disambiguating what is pervasively known as ambiguity in linguistic models. Linguistic models is pervasive as ambiguity. A watch is a noun and a verb. And so So what I did was I published, and I do two things parallel. I would always publish 27 to 40 chapters, and then I'll do a lecture on it. And this particular area I work in, transdisciplinary, is called, I came up with that concept called linguistic organic search engine theory, which is a taxonomic approach to the disambiguating ambiguity. So you have cross-disciplinary. I may explain one discipline within the context of another, using physics to explain music. Multidisciplinary, I may take psychopathology, pathology, parapsychology, philosophy, some areas of physics, cognitive neuroscience into consideration. Transdisciplinary is where I converge computer programming and linguistic models, how programming utilizes the arbitrary aspect of language, because language is predicated on a high level of arbitrariness, primarily when you look at the word cup, right? Philosophically speaking, the whole area of semiotics, sign and symbols, there's no correlation or immutable deductive laws that state that there's a correlation between the sound or the word we attribute to the physical attributes. I may fidget and I may stutter at times because I'm trying to condense this video down. So linguistic is predicated on a high level of arbitrariness, and we see where on a fundamental level it is governed and is dominated by a sort of evolutionary immutable deductive law, like primarily in two subfields, phonology and phonetics, which is we find yes, receiving, and we find like no has a sort of repulsion. So in transdisciplinary now, I highlight the inefficiency of the top 5 search engine online and how it's incapable of disambiguating primarily ambiguity. So we have cross-disciplinary, we have multidisciplinary, we have transdisciplinary, and we have one of my favorite, interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary is where on a molecular, I'm speaking metaphorically, analogically, on an infinitesimal level, two which perceived disciplines that effaces and appear to efface on an infinitesimal level, primarily physics and linguistics. Well, what's the relationship between physics and linguistics? Well, when we get into literary devices, primarily figurative and rhetorical devices, we know rhetorical devices is really conducive to the power of persuasion. What is a sarcastic statement? A sarcastic statement is a literal statement with a contrasting interpretation derived from tone. Sarcasm, condescension, and some aspect of verbal irony. So why is this interdisciplinary? Well, why is a sarcastic statement literal but a contrasting interpretation derived from tone? And this has to do with cognitive neuroscience and how the brain perceives tonality in a lexical or syntactic sentence. And it has to do with the irregularity of the rise and fall and tone, of tone in speech. And this is where we get into areas like intonation, inflection, cadence, and tonal modulation, which is 2 areas in the subfields of phonetics and phonology. But when you start studying intonation is where we isolate certain aspects of a rise or fall in speech. Inflection is the rise or fall in the former or latter part of a speech or the middle of a speech. Cadence is the consistency of that rise and fall in the former, middle, or latter. And modulation is the overall evaluation of that rise and fall in speech. That's sound. So we studying the amplitude, frequency, velocity, acceleration, momentum of the rise and fall in speech. So interdisciplinary is where we realize that on a deep level, when we get into rhetorical devices and the power of persuasion, we know that all contrast or polarized interpretation derive from how the sound is interpreted. Like, no can have many meanings. One prime example is a trivial meaning is, hey, you heard Jay-Z and her husband is getting divorced? No, that no is sense, but that no insinuates, tell me more. And then you have the no where the no ascends, no, like someone's falling. And then you have the no as the polite, receptible gesture, and then you have the no as the regression. You have the abrupt no, no. So it's the same no, but all the different interpretations derive from tone. So in rhetorical devices, right, this is where physics and linguistics meet when we study the tonality, the rise and fall in speech. I apologize, I have to elaborate on. So my website is based on a cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary. I study physics, I study music within the context of physics. I get into areas of psychopathology, pathology, parapsychology, areas of philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, metaphysics, phenomenology. Transdisciplinary is where I consolidate computer programming and linguistic models. And interdisciplinary is where areas of linguistics, primarily rhetorical devices and literary devices, right? You see where there's sort of, you're dealing with, on a molecular level, you're dealing with physics, the properties of physics. It's tonality, and to measure the rise and fall, that is where we're dealing with sound, which is actually the collision of air molecules, and areas of phonetics. So these are the 4 key areas. This is sort of to disambiguate because I'm quite a conundrum, right? And I'm quite an ambiguous individual to put into perspective. Now, outside these 4 key areas, I do have a vested interest in all of these disciplines independently. Like in philosophy, I get into areas, if I was to discuss philosophy independently, I get into areas like dualism, monism, non-duality, idealism, materialism, pragmatism, pantheism, panentheism, panpsychism, animism, hylozoism, gnosticism, realism, solipsism, rationalism, empiricism. I get into a number of different areas: metaphysical and epistemological, solipsism, metaphysics, the subfield of metaphysics, ontology. I love philosophy. So there's a lot of, so I could get into these areas independently. One of my key focus primarily in physics these days is in philosophy. I apologize if there's any error. I want this to be natural and organic. This is the introduction to who I am on my website. Is substance dualism. Substance dualism, I get into occasionalism, parallelism, interactionism, epiphenomenalism, functionalism, physicalism, and all these different attributes. In physics, specifically, if I was to discuss physics, I get into light, the electromagnetic spectrum. I have an infatuation with the electromagnetic radiation, the frequency, infrared, radio wave, microwave, the visible spectrum, and higher up the electromagnetic spectrum, X-ray, ultraviolet, gamma radiation. I get into a number of different, the wave-particle duality, the paradox, photon. I get into which is Richard Feynman, got me infatuated with quantum electrodynamics, the relationship between light and matter. And in music, I know how to write, compose, arrange, transpose, transcribe, how chords are constructed, how chords are built, how to express ingenuity through music, how to innovate, how to tune by ear. So I work in these areas independently. In parapsychology, I get into areas like precognition, premonition, clairvoyance, retrocognition, telekinesis, psychokinesis, telepathy, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, psychometry, clairalience, also known as clairolfaction, also known as clairessence, and then we have clairgustance. I also get into metaphysics, and phenomenology. I also get into areas like subliminal, supraliminal, hyperliminal, hypnosis, and neurolinguistic programming, which is a correlation between neurological processes, linguistic models, behavioral patterns, and the human experience. And in linguistics, I get into phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, applied linguistics, sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, and the philosophical aspect of language. So I have a number of different independent interests, and at times I will consolidate them into 4 key areas: cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary disciplines. Now, 2 hobbies of mine is I love to write, compose, arrange, transcribe music, which I mentioned prior to as one of my hobbies. My second hobby is I have an infatuation with how some of the largest major corporations, primarily entrepreneurial start off, how how they germinate to fruition, how they end up on the NASDAQ stock market, and how do they all aggregate funds? Where do they get their annual revenue from? And this was inspired by Warren Buffett, a famous investor on the 400-500, who says, I learned from him to diversify your portfolio. When you diversify your portfolio, you cut your losses. And he reads annual reports religiously. In fact, his company Berkshire Hathaway is a multinational conglomeration, right, which is an insurance firm. But you could see for decades that it was really built around company acquisition, something a lot of big major mammoth multinational conglomeration have learned from, like Google and Apple. They've all followed in the same footsteps. And Warren Buffett did claim that he writes his annual reports himself. So one of my hobbies is reading annual reports. This is all part of my introduction. I want to get a sense of who I am in all my imperfection, all my idiosyncrasies. The camera, the stuttering. I want you to experience who I am organically as an independent person. I want you to get the essence of me unscripted and organically. So I love to study annual reports, quarterly statements, and financial reports. I study both fundamental analysis in the stock market, and I do technical analysis, kind of like the astrological approach to astronomy. And I like to study how companies with a market value of over $500 billion, their expenditure, their revenue, their surplus, their deficit, and their annual revenue, primarily McDonald's annual revenue is over 65% real estate, right? Apple is based on product. Google is based on advertisement. And it makes perfect sense because I noticed that within the context of music and studying the stock market and reading annual reports, right, I could transfer innovation I discovered from there. And I solved problems by studying the company's annual report, because you would figure there's a juxtaposition of incongruity, right? A search engine and a video sharing network, which was one of the biggest, the most profound company acquisition or ever in the history, was the Google YouTube acquisition. Why would Google buy YouTube? There's a juxtaposition of incongruity. How do you fuse that? And by studying the company's annual report, I realized that over 75% of Google annual revenue derived from advertisements. So it makes perfect sense, not so much for the advertisement potentiality of using YouTube, but the fact that prior to the 1.5 billion acquisition, YouTube, probably say 6 months to a year prior, celebrated 1 billion user register. One of the way that juxtaposition of incongruity was effaced from an economical standpoint was the first thing Google did was, after the acquisition, was make all 1-point-something billion user register convert their user account to Gmail email, automatically making Gmail the largest email register on the planet. It was a brilliant consolidation. They paid $1.5 billion for over 1.something billion user register, advertisement potentiality. So I like that from studying the stock market, and the ability to predict when a company is going to ascend, when it's going to descend, and how, that's my hobby. That's my infatuation. So there you have it. This is my website, and on my website you will see a consolidation of all this stuff. Now, why are you here? I do a lot of this different stuff. I get charged for consultation. I work primarily for a number of different affluent and prominent individuals, because I charge a price because I have invested due diligence, tedious effort, perseverance, motivation, determination, and decades of hard work and effort, right? Not just for personal improvement, self-development, but to educate myself and to acquire, basically to consolidate it all into knowledge acquisition. So I've worked with private equity firms, venture capitalists, angel investors, signing disclosure agreement. I've worked with individuals, CEO for large, big angel investing corporations that decided to work independently to raise millions of dollars for big philanthropy project, incognito, to avoid credit. And I've worked with a number of different individuals who are part of the brainstorming team. So consider me an asset or commodity. I'll bring a lot to the table. Whether you hire me for consultation, you're an entrepreneur or a startup, you just like to have a discussion with me on the projects I do. It's less about what I do. Consider me an individual with abilities. And these abilities have immense capacity. And one of the attributes, a byproduct of that, is my ability to be proficient, consistent, and competent. Please take into consideration that I provide consultation, tutor, lecture. I'm available for speaking, for oration on a number of different subjects. And I'm polarized. It's very specific to understand. I'm polarized into two areas. I'm a radical materialist and I'm a staunch idealist. So I'm everything scientific, physical, and the material plane, and and I'm everything outside the realm of scientific inquiry, or where science dismiss and say it's inconclusive or soft science. So I study material science, and I also study obscure, esoteric, arcane, ancient, and knowledge preceding eons of time. Yeah, I'm impersonal. I don't validate or invalidate, right? I'm more of because I learn philosophically, right, on a deep philosophical level. To accept an idea, it requires the dismissal of many more ideas. And the reason I derive to this conclusion is when I find humans' predisposition to absolute is quite prevalent in the discipline of philosophy. It's either idealism or materialism, dualism or monism, compatibilism or incompatibilism, determinism or indeterminism. Is it causality or is it a causality? You see a lot of contradiction. Again, it's a byproduct. It's a predisposition to absolutes, and we will learn that predisposition to absolutes is an evolutionary human fallacy, because it really is a result of false dichotomy or false dilemma, where two contrasting or opposing ideas are presented as the only absolute possibility. So there's more variables to take into consideration. So what makes me interesting? I possess a number of different abilities. You want tutor, you want lecture, you want advice, you want consultation, you'd like me to be a think tank on your project, I could provide that as well. Brainstorm, I could provide brainstorm. But what makes me quite a unique individual is where everyone else fails, everyone else shortcomings, I will succeed. Most will contribute horizontally. So there's horizontal and there's vertical growth. Horizontal growth is where individuals provide ideas and innovation and ingenuity that adds to the augmentation, the alteration, and the modification of an established idea or concept. What I provide is virtual information. The information and the contributions I provide is because I'm coming from a vast amount of different areas. So I could juggle a concept with many different variables. I provide ingenuity. I provide a kind of virtual contribution where the whole idea, the whole original idea, most likely will have to scrap, and then a new idea or concept emerges with a completely different paradigm shift. So that's it. That's me in a nutshell. Go to my site, see my work. It will appear disparate. I hope by this introduction, I want this natural, organic video to advertise, market, and promote myself, that you get a sense of who I am as an individual. And again, and thank you for listening. This is my divine purpose. So go to my site, see my work, and at some given point, some aspect of my work, you will be able to relate to it. And if I could contribute a snippet, by the way, I charge because I consider myself invaluable. I've took decades for the acquisition of knowledge, academia, intellectual understanding, and wisdom, and all the areas that the material or metaphysics, which is considered outside the realm of scientific inquiry. I study there's areas of biology I get into as well. And I'm not going to edit this video. I want this to be organic. What you're seeing is who you will interact. I also study the endocrine system, which is a group of glands existing within an organism, It's an organ. Within this context, it's the human species, right? Okay, so its purpose is to distribute, regulate, and modulate the secretions of hormones within the circulatory system. You know, this is how homeostasis is maintained in the endocrine system. Homeostasis is just a biological term for equilibrium between interdependent elements. And the reason I'm saying why I could be a commodity or an asset to your brainstorming team is this perspective allows me to realize that independent, when you look at the endocrine system, you have the pineal, you have the pituitary, you have the thyroid, you have the thymus, you have lateral, you have the pancreas, and you have the adrenal, and below you have the reproductive organs, all working independently, secreting their own hormones, melatonin, dopamine, serotonin, but yet they're independent. So I may extract this biological metaphor and apply it to entrepreneurship. And so, okay, so you have 5 different concepts. All these concepts, they all share some kind of mutual dichotomy. How do we juxtapose this incongruity and find a commonality that they all share across the board? And I might look for metaphors and analogies in biology, because all of our predecessors, all of the great minds who shaped the evolution of our planet, all of them, no exception, right, conceptualized in metaphors and analogy. Einstein used image and colors. So I studied the endocrine system, the biology. I also studied the physics, the colors. I also studied the metaphysical aspect of it, the 7 energy center of spiritual power in the human body. From a religious perspective, I also studied the Bible. I also studied the Quran. I also studied a number of different Veda texts, even primarily currently the Bhagavad-Gita, because Bhagavad-Gita is primarily a conscious, transcendental articulation of Krishna himself. Again, I don't validate or invalidate. I embrace all ideas. And so, within the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna, the divine potency himself, communicates with you individually, and there's a intimate relationship between how he operates, how you can cooperate, and he is the enjoyee of this physical reality, and it's all the movies at once. So me participating on your panel board, being a contributing factor, I have a number of different variables I could draw from. And please take me into consideration. If you would like to speak to me, if you would like to have a discussion, I charge $500 for consultation. And wherever you see me, wherever I can be used, wherever I can be an asset to you, kindly, my appreciation would defy description. And I'm uploading this video because I wanted it to be organic, authentic. I want you as the viewer to experience me in essence. What you are experiencing here is what you'll experience in person, unscripted. I have something, and I have a divine purpose, and that purpose is to serve you. And by you coming, I will serve you. You just have to trust, visit my site. My work precedes me, and the fact that I can sit here and I can articulate all these things, it's nothing more than a mere condensed introduction of what the variables, the variances of my abilities, the level of the depth and proficiency I have at it, and my ability to be competent and proficient at that. And I think this is where expertise come into the equation. I'm not saying that I am just saying that I will be quite a unique individual to add to your team. Consider me for tutoring, consider me for lecturing, consider me for lessons, for consultation, to write a project for you, to read a paper, to restruct. Take any variables into consideration. If you contact me to have a 1-hour conversation with me, it's $500, right? And you will understand why that you pay for what you get. My work precedes me, and I consider myself an invaluable asset. And I look forward to working with you in the future. And don't try to figure out the service I can provide now, because I'm highly ambiguous and it's almost difficult to put me into perspective. It's paradoxical. But visit my site, see my work, and what aspect of it you deem, even if it's to to articulate a concept or to represent a company or be a spokesperson, or you'd like me to restructure or articulate something in a unique way, you just want to use my voice, take all variables into consideration. You manifested me. I am here to serve you, and I am giving you an introduction of who I am. And again, I apologize. This video introduction, it's imperfect, but I wanted you to experience the organic aspect of me in my natural, most organic, impromptu, spontaneous, unscripted state. Thank you again. I appreciate you listening. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to you considering me a possibility for futuristic projects, and my appreciation defies description. And also, see my hair? My dreads are on the ground. That's a confirmation that I have a divine purpose. You manifested me. My dreads touch the ground. This is a perpetual reflected pastime of the eternal spiritual flame. We've done this before. You've come to me before. You've manifested me before. You've paid me for service before. I will provide a service that's exact and precise and relevant to what you need in this current predicament and state, because I am your manifestation, and you know that. Go to my site, you will notice that I have knowledge in science and I have knowledge in many different areas simultaneously. Thank you for listening, and my appreciation defies description.